So I've been accused on this channel of being an overly lyric-focused listener sometimes, and while I would disagree with the word overly there, I do recognize that I listen to and think about and consider the specifics of lyrics more often than a lot of other listeners. I just want to take a few minutes today to think about the broader question of how much lyrics matter in music appreciation. I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why they tend to be overlooked or dismissed, and make my own arguments for why I think a considered appreciation of lyrics is a significant part of music listening and something that's really been a big enhancement to my own appreciation. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project playing music that's influenced by but not bounded by the prog rock tradition. Look up Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service. Now, obviously, lyrics do matter hugely in most people's experience of and response to music, right? Most people know most of the lyrics to their favorite songs. Most very popular music makes a conscious point of using lyrics that speak to people's emotions in a direct way. That's part of what makes that music accessible and popular. And, even very casual music listeners have probably kind of puzzled over the lyrics to some song that they found particularly opaque. My question is more whether we should be paying attention to lyrics if they don't spring readily to the front of our attention, right? And maybe they don't spring readily to the front of our attention because other aspects of the song seem more significant, because the singer's presentation makes them unintelligible, because they're in the third verse after the long guitar solo and we've kind of stopped paying attention. Because they just don't make any sense at initial appraisal, right? Are lyrics like that don't present themselves so readily, are they worthy of the additional effort for that considered attention? Now, obviously, music is full of artists ostentatiously not giving a shit about lyrics. There's more examples than I can begin to name, really, but the first one that springs right into my head is the song Live Forever by Oasis, right? Has no second or third verses, just repeats the third verse an additional 2 times. The one verse that it does have is obviously just kind of tossed off bullshit. And of course, that song was a great big hit, and I remember finding it very transcendent as an 11-year-old, which I think is about the oldest you can be, and not kind of be a little bit bothered by the laziness of the construction of that song. But it's kind of a classic in its realm, and I don't imagine that Noel Gallagher has ever thought to himself, really should have given that one another 10 minutes, right? And obviously music sometimes has expressive qualities which transcend words. There's the famous story of Paul McCartney waking up in the middle of the night with the melody for Yesterday in his head, but set to the words, "Scrambled eggs, I loved your legs." You could argue that that's actually a more interesting and less saccharine lyric than the one that ended up in the final song, right? And there are lots of artists who tend to skip the step where you take the kind of absurd brainstorm lyric and replace it with something more conventional. That technique is kind of, I would guess part of how Guided by Voices achieves such a prolific output. Or if you've ever heard the Devin Townsend song Earth Day, it has this interesting effect where he is singing mundane nonsense over this very moving and grandiose and conventionally epic musical backdrop, and that disjunction is a very intriguing effect. But the thing is, though, even mediocre lyrics are, I think, a repository of effort and care that often goes underappreciated, maybe more underappreciated than anything else in the whole kind of amount of effort that's put into a song. I think there are lots of times when a great deal of energy and craft is put into a lyric that then hardly anyone notices or thinks about. I'd even say that the ratio of effort versus appreciation in lyric writing probably is worse than any other element of song construction. If you have a good bass part, or if you have a good drum line, you can kind of repeat that as many times as you need to fill up the song, with variations in performance, but you can take the same thing and do it repeatedly. But every line of a verse is going to require the creation of a new set of words. So I think a lot of artists have put time and care into words that aren't nearly as appreciated as a good bass part, for instance, might be. And I'd say that for me as a listener, lyrics have been the biggest space for finding new things to notice and appreciate with repeated listens of familiar material. Even though I think of myself as a lyric-focused listener, I still regularly catch clever phrases or interesting ideas or vivid images or unexpected meanings in songs that maybe I heard for the first time 10, 15, 20 years ago. But where I just didn't ever happen to give that particular line the level of thought and appreciation that the writer hoped that I would. And that comes, I think, not just in terms of lyrics in isolation, but in terms of how the text interacts with the sonic elements, right? When I was doing the series ranking and reviewing every Genesis song, a lot of the things that I found most interesting to discover in that process had to do with finding ways that the lyrics kind of paralleled or commented on the musical content that I hadn't noticed until I had to explain what I loved about the song. And, suddenly there were these moments of resonance that I don't think I'd ever consciously appreciated before. And I think that those alignments a lot of the time will happen subconsciously from the writer hearing something in the sonic qualities of the track that inspire a particular type of imagery or phrasing, right? I love that effect, and I think it's an underrated way for collaboration to occur. So this may seem a little bit maudlin or preachy, but I think if you love a particular artist's work and you really want to pay the appropriate level of respect to the effort that has been put into the creation of it, then consciously thinking about the words should be part of that. A little anecdote that I hope isn't too self-centered. I got the Genesis albums Duke and A Trick of the Tail on CD before my family actually had a CD player. We were very late adopters, which is kind of funny now because I've kind of become this lifelong CD fetishist way past the point when many people retain CD collections. There might be some connection there actually between those two events. But anyway, I got these two albums I was very excited to listen to. I didn't have a CD player. I had to give them to a friend to tape them, right? And there was about a week before he gave me the tape where I just had to sit and read the lyrics every night without being able to listen to the album. I mean, I guess I didn't have to read the lyrics, but I thought it was interesting to do so, right? I was excited enough for these albums that even though I couldn't listen to them, it was pleasurable to me to flip through the booklet, read the lyrics, try to imagine what the songs might sound like based just on the words. So by the time I actually heard the music, there was this uncanny sense of familiarity that came from reading all the words beforehand. A lot of my habits to this day might actually come from that experience. I had a film studies professor once in college who said that if you really want to appreciate a movie, you should watch it 3 times. Once in the normal way, but then once with the sound off, so you're just thinking about it as a set of visual elements, and then once just listening to it as an audio construction without watching it. Now, lots of films don't stand up to that exercise, but for the ones that do, there are layers of craft and richness that you notice when you do that you might not if you're just experiencing the unified whole of those parts. Now, frankly, do I do that myself with movies? Not really, but if I were someone who, aspired to be a serious critic, I would. And I think as a parallel to that, it's an interesting exercise to read the lyrics sheet to an album in isolation, then listen to it with the greatest possible focus on what's happening instrumentally, then try to consciously think about how those elements interact. And that is something that I do on certain occasions. Obviously, those things are meant to be experienced together, but I think even if something is meant to be heard in the context of a whole, approaching it on its own sometimes can be a way to enhance your understanding of how it merges with a bigger context to create that overall effect. Anyway, just some thoughts here about the value of lyrics as a freestanding art form and as an area that I think many listeners don't give the same amount of consideration that they do other aspects of the song. Thanks very much for your time and attention. Check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service. We'll see you.